You may have seen these videos making the rounds on social media. As I mentioned, this apparent new world order when it comes to currencies and nations banding together to dethrone the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But you got to ask yourself, is it as simple as out with the old and in with the new? And how would you even do this? Well, luckily, I have someone a lot smarter than me, University of Johannesburg Professor of Practice, Prof. Stephen Boyke Sidley, making time for us this morning. Prof, hello to you. So where is this coming from, do you think, this idea of getting rid of the dollar as the global foreign currency exchange? Where has this come from? Good morning.
Good morning. Gareth, this aspiration to unseat the dollar as the world's global currency has actually been around since about 1945, when the dollar did become the global currency at a conference in Massachusetts at a place called Bretton Woods. And the reason why the dollar was nominated and approved as the world's global currency, it's coming out of the destruction and the exhaustion of the Second World War. It was the only country that was rich, and it was the only democracy who could protect a currency. So everybody, for practical reasons, decided that the dollar would be the global currency, and it has remained that way, and it has kept the world in stable economic climate for the past 70 years. In the past 20 years, as China has ascended the ladder of economic output, there have been rumblings to get out from underneath the dollar so that people could sort of have their own, I suppose, monetary independence without the pressure of having to both settle in dollars and having to rely on the dollar exchange rate. The problem is there's nobody else. America remains an enormously rich company. Most importantly, it has no capital controls, which means that money can flow without restriction across borders. This is not true of China. China has draconian capital controls. The exchange rate of the dollar is the most stable in the world, along perhaps with the Swiss franc and one or two others. It's still a democracy. There is property laws. There is rule of law. There is peaceful handover of power, notwithstanding what happened on January the 6th this year. There simply isn't an alternative to the dollar, no matter who else wants to come into the fold.
Because I suppose everyone's going to be asking a question that we measure everything in the US dollar, whether it's the fuel price, whether it's the gold bullion reserve as well. So if there was this call from, as we're saying, this new world order, I imagine this new world order is all the countries except the West. I imagine it's the Chinese of the world. It is the other big currencies of the world. So it just wouldn't make practical sense. That's what you're telling me.
It doesn't make practical sense, and I'm going to give you a very simple example. So let's say you're a very large company in Nigeria needing to order a whole bunch of goods from, say, Brazil, okay, to developing nations. Those two countries do not trust each other's currency to not be volatile. So the person who's doing the ordering in Nigeria is going to say, let's do this in dollars because I know that the exchange rate in the dollars is not going to suddenly plummet between the time that I place my order and I have to pay. And that is the basic reason why the dollar still sits in the center of all these transactions. It's trustworthy. It will settle. Its value won't change. One cannot say the same for any of the other currencies in the world.
So when we start talking about reserve banks as well, last knowledge that I had is that about 60% of global reserve banks are still sitting with the US dollar as well. And I suppose that's the problem, is when currencies start trying to measure themselves against other currencies, they're always going to go to the reserve bank to do that. The reserve bank is going to look for the most stable currency. And 60% of reserve banks, if I have this correct, Professor, are still using the US dollar. However, I say that, when I say 60%, that means there is 40% of reserve banks who don't use the US dollar.
Yes, it depends whether you're talking about international trade or other settlements. It's very high. Let me give an example here, which I wrote in my article in Daily Maverick about how strong the American economy is in 1990, America's accounted for 58% of the G7 GDP compared with 40%. Sorry, today it accounts for 58% compared to 40% in 1990. That's a growth of 18% since 1990. this still is sort of the mountain of stability in the economic world, which is not to say there won't be some inter-country trade in local currencies, but you doing inter-country trade between, say, China and Russia, or China and South Africa, and South Africa's currency suddenly collapses 5% overnight, as it did last week, I think it was. This doesn't make any buyer or anybody on the counterparty side of the transaction feel very safe. So it's my expectation that there will be a growing move from the dollar, but it won't be more than a couple of percent. It doesn't threaten the hegemony of the dollar, and with good reason, because that would threaten global stability.
Let me ask you this in closing, Prof, just a final question to you, because you mentioned Brazil, you've mentioned China, you've mentioned Russia. I mean, obviously, what comes to my mind straight away is going to be that of BRICS and where we fit into this. So if you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa in this, would it not make more sense for us here in the south of Africa to be playing more with currencies from the BRICS nations?
Yeah, well, first of all, BRICS doesn't have a currency yet. They'll have to develop one, which of course is a very tall order, which means they're going to have to develop a digital currency and perhaps a blockchain-based currency. And even when that happens, you have people within that fold: Brazil, which has got a volatile currency; South Africa, which has an incredibly unstable currency; China, which has a stable currency right now until the Communist Party decides to change its mind about something. That's the problem. It's a dictatorship. Russia, which is not even on the same scale as everybody else in terms of the unpredictability of its policy. It's very easy to say that. It's very difficult to do.